Because Magic is a game of resources, fundamentally, what you have to do to win a game is effectively manage your resources against your opponent's resources. In 1v1 Magic, this concept is more straightforward because if you cast Murder to destroy your opponent's creature, you've traded one of your cards for one of their cards, and we call this a 1-for-1. And if their creature costs more than the 3 mana you spent on Murder, we can say you traded up because you only had to spend 3 mana to get rid of a card which cost more than 3 mana, effectively meaning you gained a mana advantage against them. But in EDH, this concept becomes more challenging because there are typically 3 opponents, which means you have to manage your resources relative to each opponent. In other words, if you 1-for-1 one of your opponents by casting Murder on one of their creatures, you and that opponent have actually each lost a card relative to your other 2 opponents. So in order to achieve victory against 3 opponents, you need to do 3 things. 1, you need to properly distribute your resources against all 3 opponents. 2, you need to react correctly to resources being used against you. And lastly, you need to encourage your opponents to use their resources against each other. Let's go through these one by one. A lot of players make the mistake of using all of their resources against a single opponent. For example, if player B has been labeled as the biggest threat, then player A will use all of their resources against that player. Typically, this means they blow up as many of that player's permanents as they can, and then also swing at them. Although there are times you need to use all of your resources against one player, it's better to avoid being in situations where you need to do that. The simplest explanation as to why this is bad is because if you're going to remove the player themselves, you may not need to remove that player's permanents because those permanents will go away when they die. Instead, you preferably want to distribute your resources against all of your opponents. For example, if I have my commander, Giada, in play, as well as Baneslayer Angel, and then I also have Swords to Plowshares in my hand, what I ideally want to do is as follows. I want to send my commander damage at one player, I want to send Baneslayer Angel at a different player, and I want to use my removal spell, Swords to Plowshares, against the remaining player. Of course, the game state is usually not so straightforward as to enable this strategy, but the basic idea is that you need to figure out how you'll deal with all 3 players over the course of the entire game, not just how you are going to deal with one player this turn. We can also get more fine-grained about this. So for example, if one player is likely to gain a lot of life in a game, then my commander will swing at them so I can circumvent their accumulation of their life resource. Then I can send the Baneslayer Angel at the player who is draining their own life to cast powerful spells, so that way they have less of their life resource available to advance their own game plan. And lastly, I can use the removal spell against the player who is trying to get ahead of everyone else on lands and cards using some sort of busted creature. Of course, it can still get more complex. Maybe the Rakdos player draining their life is a very immediate threat to me, so possibly the commander also goes in their direction. Or maybe I have to kill the Simic player's commander, but also I need to get their life total down before they start wiping the board. Those situations can call for you only to deal with 1 or 2 of your opponents, but you just have to keep in mind that you're doing the remaining player's dirty work. In other words, if all 3 of my opponents are using their resources against each other, then I can sit there and accumulate my own resources and wait to do anything until my opponents have largely run each other out of both life and cards. Think about it. Have you ever played a game where one player gets mana screwed early on, but that's the player who wins the game? That happens because the other 3 players basically fight a 3-player game with each other, and that remaining player sits there with a full life total and a full grip of cards, and once they eventually draw into the lands they need and get going, they're able to successfully finish off the rest of the players who have now largely run themselves out of cards and life while battling each other. On to point number 2, reacting correctly to resources being used against you. When resources are used against you, such as if you're attacked by a creature or have removal used against you, it's important to figure out how you can react in a way which is the least bad for you. For example, if the next player in turn order attacks you for a lot of damage, it can be tempting to use up all of your creatures to block their creatures. However, that will also open you up to the next two players attacking you as well. So sometimes you need to be okay with losing some of your life resource in order to let more of your creatures survive combat. This is especially true if you can block without losing any permanents and then simply take damage from the biggest creatures. Of course, you need to balance your need to maintain your life resource with your need to maintain the number of creatures you have in play. But I'm not trying to tell you what you should generally do in these situations. Instead, I'm trying to give you a decision-making framework so you can decide for yourself what you think is best. So this way, if you see a Mana Barbs out, you can say, well, I don't want to lose too much of my life in this combat because Mana Barbs is out, and so I will need to use my life as a resource to cast spells. So instead, I'll lose more of my creatures. And there will be times that decision is wrong and you block and lose all of your creatures only for someone to cast Beast Within on Mana Barbs before it gets back around to being your turn. But that's just an additional data point you can use to make that decision again in the future. And the next time you're in that situation, if you see that same player who cast Beast Within sitting on 3 open mana, maybe you take the riskier play and take the damage from combat and save all your creatures instead. Another specific scenario I want to talk about is your commander getting removed. Removal used against a commander is inherently a tempo play, because that player can replay their commander again for more mana. So if a player removes your commander, what they're often unknowingly doing is deciding to go down in card advantage in order to temporarily remove your commander from the battlefield. So there's times I have only my commander in play, and someone targets her with a removal spell, and I do have a way to protect her against it, but I decide I'll just let her die instead because my hand is otherwise empty and I'm probably not going to have anything to do with all my mana the next turn anyways. So I might as well just use that mana to cast my commander again. This lets me keep the protection spell for a more opportune time, maybe later in the game when I've rebuilt my board and someone goes to wipe it. Plus, with my decks, I always try to build in something to gain back lost advantage if my commander dies. Well, Opal Palace might not seem like that strong of a card. There's been long games with multiple board wipes where Giada dies so many times that I end up casting her with 5+1/+1 counters on her thanks to Opal Palace, and she actually ends up as the biggest creature on the board and I can use her to close out the game. I also like the Commander Storm cards, which copy themselves for each time you've cast a commander from the command zone. Sometimes I have Imperial Storm in hand and watch as my opponents kill Giada over and over again, and I know that eventually she'll stick around on the board, and then when she does, I'll cast Imperial Storm to create a series of progressively larger angel tokens with possibly 40 or more power and toughness. And because my opponents already spent their removal on my commander, odds are good I'll be able to swing over and start killing people with my massive angel army. There's also times you might need to do nothing in order to manage your resources correctly. If your opponent has played Sheoldred and it doesn't seem like anyone is going to be able to kill her, usually the worst thing you can do is just play one creature each turn, which you are then forced to sacrifice to Sheoldred. It can feel bad, but often it's better to instead just cast nothing on your turns and wait until someone draws into the removal needed to save the table from being locked out of the game. Of course, if your deck has good graveyard recursion options, such as Eerie Ultimatum, you may want to get a little tricky and play your creatures into the Sheoldred, knowing that any lost card advantage will be made up later when you cast Eerie Ultimatum. All of that is to say that both when building a deck and playing a deck, it's good to think about how you will try to make bad situations less bad. Running cards to protect your own stuff is good, but you still want to prepare yourself for situations where you can't protect your stuff and things aren't going well for you. And you also need to deal with the fact that oftentimes these protection spells result in just 1-for-1 situations between you and another opponent, and they don't necessarily give you an advantage against your other two opponents. The last point I want to talk about is encouraging your opponents to use their resources against each other. Encouraging your opponents to go after each other has a twofold advantage. Not only does it mean your opponent's resources get removed or attacked, but it also saves you from having those resources instead being sent in your direction. Goad is an ability that explicitly forces your opponents to attack each other, but even if you don't run Goad effects, cards like Mazavith or Propaganda will encourage your opponents to attack each other in a similar manner. One of my friends also recently said that playing against my Angels deck has taught him how good Vigilance is. One of the reasons Vigilance is one of my favorite keywords for EDH is that simply having blockers up will encourage opponents to attack each other, and so being able to attack while also keeping up blockers is really strong in a format where there's only one turn where you attack, but 3 turns where you might block. And it isn't just creatures which can be encouraged to be sent towards your opponents. With a card like Archetype of Endurance, not only do you protect your own creatures from spot removal and open up your opponents to receiving the spot removal, but the very fact your creatures can't be targeted increases the odds your opponent's creatures will be. This is because oftentimes people want to or need to use their removal, and if they can't target your stuff with it, they will target your opponent's stuff instead, even if you're clearly the biggest threat and that's actually the wrong play. I want to end this by reiterating the fact that none of this is meant to be general guidance on the exact right plays to make. Instead, I just want to provide examples of what I do that will help you think about how to manage the fact you're facing 3 players, not just 1. So that means every turn cycle, your opponents draw 3 cards for your 1 card. They have 3 times as many untap and combat steps as you do, and they have triple the life total that you have. Thinking through how you will deal with that inherent resource disadvantage is the best bet you have of closing out an EDH game in your favor.